The Crown Rule 1858 to 1947, Government of India Act of 1858. This significant act was enacted in the wake of revolt of 1857, also known as the First War of Independence or the Sipahi Mutiny. The act known as the Act for the Good Government of India abolished the East India Company and transferred the powers of government and territories revenues to the British Crown. The features of this act were as follows. It provided that India henceforth was to be governed by and in the name of Her Majesty. It changed the designation of the Governor General of India to that of Viceroy of India. He, Viceroy, was the direct representative of the British Crown in India. Lord Canning thus became the first Viceroy of India. It ended the system of double government by abolishing the Board of Control and Court of Directors. It created a new office, Secretary of the State for India, vested with the complete authority and control over Indian administration. The Secretary of State was a member of the British Cabinet and was responsible ultimately to the British Parliament. It established a 15-member Council of India to assist the Secretary of the State for India. The council was an advisory body. The Secretary of State was made the chairman of the council. It constituted the Secretary of the State in Council as a body corporate capable of suing and being sued in India and in England. The Act of 1858 was, however, largely confined to the improvement of the administrative machinery by which the Indian government was to be supervised and controlled in England. It did not alter in any substantial way the system of government that prevailed in India. Indian Council Act of 1861. After the Great Revolt of 1857, the British government felt the necessity of seeking the cooperation of the Indians in the administration of their country. In pursuance of this policy of association, three acts were enacted by the British Parliament in 1861, 1892 and 1909. The Indian Council Act of 1861 is an important landmark in the constitutional and political history of India. The features of this act were as follows. It made a beginning of the representative institution by associating Indians with the lawmaking process. This provided that the Viceroy should nominate some Indians as non-official members of his expanded council. In 1862, Lord Canning, then Viceroy, nominated three Indians to his legislative council, the Raja of Benares, the Maharaja of Patiala and Sir Dinakar Rao. It initiated the process of decentralization by restoring the legislative powers to the Bombay and Madras presidencies. This reversed the centralizing tendency that started from the Regulating Act of 1773 and reached its climax under the Charter Act of 1833. This policy of legislative devolution resulted in the grant of almost complete internal autonomy to the provinces in 1937. It also provided for the establishment of new legislative councils for Bengal, northwestern provinces and Punjab, which were established in 1862, 1886 and 1897 respectively. It empowered the Viceroy to make rules and orders for the more convenient transaction of business in the Council. It also gave a recognition to the portfolio system introduced by Lord Canning in 1859. Under this, a member of the Viceroy's Council was made in charge of one or more department of the government and was authorized to issue final orders on behalf of the Council on matters of his department. It empowered the Viceroy to issue ordinances without the concurrence of the Legislative Council during an emergency. The life of such an ordinance was 6 months. Indian Council Act of 1892. It increased the number of additional non-official members in the central and provincial legislative councils, but they maintained the official majority in them. It increased the functions of legislative council and gave them the powers of discussing the budget and addressing questions to the executive. It provided for the nomination of some non-official members of the Central Legislative Council by the Viceroy on the recommendation of the provincial legislative councils and the Bengal Chamber of Commerce, and that of the provisional legislative councils by the governors on the recommendation of the district boards, municipalities, universities, trade association, zamindars, and chambers. The Act made limited and indirect provisions for the use of election in filling up some of the non-official seats both in the central and provincial legislative councils. The word election was however not used in the Act. The process was described as nomination made on the recommendation of certain bodies.